Welcome back to Real Talk, everyone. I'm Josh Bell, your guide through the quirky, dark, and fantastical world of cinema. And we're deep in the heart of our Tim Burton series. Today, we're examining Dark Shadows, a film that, much like its vampire protagonist, has struggled to find its place in the light. For those just joining us, a quick reminder that we're working our way chronologically through Burton's career, revisiting all his feature films as director. Burton's work is known for its unique blend of gothic whimsy, his love for misunderstood outsiders, and his playful relationships with the macabre. But every artist has a misstep, and Dark Shadows is considered one of his more controversial entries, a film that stirred up some debate among his most devoted fans and critics. Dark Shadows is based on the cult 1960s gothic soap opera of the same name, and Burton, a longtime fan, decided to give it his own spin. Imagine the eerie setting of Collinswood Manor, mixed with groovy 70s style and Burton's signature visual flair. It's a strange blend of horror, comedy, and family drama, set against the backdrop of a cursed family and a vampire with a vendetta. So what went wrong? Or did anything go wrong at all? Today we're here to unpack these questions. So let's dig into the film's premise and characters in a quick plot overview of this eccentric, darkly comic tale. Dark Shadows begins with a look back at the Collins family in the 18th century, where we meet Barnabas, a wealthy and charming young man with everything he could want, until he makes a fatal mistake. After rejecting the advances of his servant, Angelique, he discovers that she's a powerful witch. Consumed by jealousy and scorn, Angelique curses Barnabas to a fate worse than death. She turns him into a vampire, and as a final act of cruelty, has him buried alive. Flash forward 2 centuries, and now it's 1972. A construction crew inadvertently frees Barnabas from his coffin, and he emerges from his dusty grave into a world that's both modern and, to him, shockingly bizarre. Groovy music, psychedelic colors, and a more liberated society all clash with Barnabas's 18th century sensibilities, and his initial bewilderment is one of the film's more memorable comedic beats. Yet his return to Collinswood Manor brings him face to face with the same curse and unresolved issues of his past. Especially Angelique, who's not only alive and well, but has thrived over the centuries and still holds a twisted, obsessive fascination with him. As he reconnects with his surviving family members, Barnabas learns that the Collins name has fallen on hard times. Determined to restore the family to its former glory, he attempts to fit into the modern world and rebuild their reputation, though he's constantly struggling against Angelique's vendetta and her desire to either possess him or destroy him. Burton clearly uses Barnabas to explore themes that have defined his career. Barnabas is the classic Burton outsider, trapped between life and death, unable to fully belong to either world, and yearning for acceptance in a society that views him as monstrous. Burton's characters often struggle to fit in, and Barnabas attempts to navigate the 1970s while clinging to his old world mannerisms that amplify that sense of alienation. But here there's a peculiar clash, as if Barnabas' story of loss and revenge doesn't fully mesh with the film's comedic tone. A disconnect we'll examine further as we move through this episode. Tim Burton's directorial style is unmistakable throughout Dark Shadows, but it's not exactly at its strongest. As always, Burton nails the gothic atmosphere. Collinswood Manor is beautifully, if hauntingly, realized, with every dark corner, creaky stairwell, and decayed room adding to the eerie, mysterious feel of the film. The manor is practically a character in itself, fitting seamlessly in Burton's twisted, haunted imagination, almost like a cousin to the eerie settings of Beetlejuice or Sleepy Hollow. One thing Burton does exceptionally well here is his use of color to create visual contrasts. Inside Collinswood Manor, he relies on dark, muted tones that bring out the shadowy, oppressive history of the Collins family. This gothic gloom stands in stark contrast to the bold, psychedelic colors of the 1970s world outside. The clash between Barnabas's old, brooding world and the vibrant modern world he's thrust into is almost cartoonish, which adds a layer of comedic absurdity to the film. Barnabas, in his black suit and ghostly pallor, is the monochromatic figure against a kaleidoscope of bell-bottoms, lava lamps, and neon lights, a visual joke that encapsulates the character's alienation. However, Burton's stylistic choices are somewhat uneven. On a technical level, he uses a mix of practical sets and CGI, but it's a balance that isn't quite consistent. Practical effects work well for the dark interiors and gothic elements, grounding them in a tactile, physical reality that Burton films thrive on. But the CGI, particularly in some of the supernatural or action sequences, feels overdone and doesn't quite blend with the otherwise grounded gothic aesthetic. There are moments where the CGI veers into the cartoonish and it pulls you out of the spooky immersive world that Burton has created. The reliance on CGI, especially noticeable in the climactic moments, where the intended horror or drama instead feels like a spectacle that clashes with the subtle dread Burton is known for. It's as if he's caught between crafting a horror comedy and a family drama, without fully committing in either direction. While the Burton trademarks, the gothic architecture, eccentric characters, and dark humor are all there, they feel restrained, like they're not quite allowed to flourish to their fullest potential. That brings us to the performances, starting again with Johnny Depp as Barnabas Collins. Depp brings his usual flair to this role, channeling a theatrical, almost Shakespearean quality that matches Barnabas's 18th century origins. His performance is layered with the kind of oddball charisma that Depp is known for. Awkward, intense, and sometimes just plain bizarre. He's constantly straddling the line between sinister and sympathetic, which can be entertaining but alienating. While Depp's offbeat charm keeps Barnabas intriguing, it sometimes tips into parody, making it hard to fully sympathize with the character's dilemmas. Still, he manages to capture that fish-out-of-water quality as he stumbles through the strange landscape of the 1970s and delivers some of the film's most memorable moments. Then, again, we have Helena Bonham Carter as Dr. Julia Hoffman, the cynical family therapist who seems to be barely holding it together. Bonham Carter is in her element here, bringing her usual eccentric energy to the role. She plays Hoffman with a dry wit and a tinge of bitterness, offering a grounded, if sarcastic, counterpoint to Barnabas's melodrama. Unfortunately, her character here feels underutilized. You sense that there's more depth to Julia than the story gives her room to explore. There's a sense that Burton could have done more with her character, especially given Bonham Carter's ability to balance humor with emotional nuance. Now, Eva Green as Angelique Bouchard, she's a whole other level. Green is magnetic, and her performance as Angelique is both fierce and flamboyant. She completely owns the role of the obsessive, vengeful witch, leaning into the camp and reveling in Angelique's dark, comedic villainy. She plays off Depp's Barnabas with fiery chemistry, creating a dynamic that's volatile and captivating. At times, Green's portrayal is almost too much, But in a film as tonally varied as Dark Shadows, her exaggerated villainy actually brings a much-needed energy to the screen, making her maybe the most memorable part of the movie. And back again, of course, is Danny Elfman with the score, another staple of Burton's films. His music blends well with the gothic visuals and add just the right amount of eerie atmosphere and whimsy. But at this point in Burton's career, it does feel a bit predictable. While the score complements the gothic tone, it doesn't quite stand out or surprise in the way Elfman's earlier collaborations with Burton did. It's solid, fitting seamlessly into the established style, but it lacks the fresh edge that once defined their partnership. Overall, the cast is filled with talented actors who give solid performances. Michelle Pfeiffer is amazing and beautiful as always, but they're sometimes let down by the story and the tonal inconsistencies. There's a sense that each actor is in a slightly different movie, which creates an odd, disjointed experience. Still, Depp, Bonham Carter, Pfeiffer, and especially Green give it their all, making Dark Shadows an interesting, if flawed, entry into Burton's body of work. One of the hallmarks of Burton's career is his ability to explore deep themes of identity, isolation, and the tension between fantasy and reality. And Dark Shadows certainly touches on all of these, but in a way that feels a bit muddled. Barnabas's journey as an 18th century vampire suddenly thrust into the wild, unfamiliar 1970s has the potential for a poignant exploration of his identity and isolation. Here's a character who's been literally buried for centuries, haunted by the weight of his family's legacy and his own dark nature, yet the film doesn't really allow us to connect with his struggle. In most Burton films, we get a visceral sense of his character's loneliness and yearning, but with Barnabas, we're kept at a distance. His struggle with displacement and his need to restore the Collins name could have served as powerful metaphors for the search for belonging and purpose. Instead, the film often relies on humor to soften these themes, which ultimately dilutes their impact. There are moments where Barnabas's sense of alienation does shine through, but they're fleeting, and they leave the character development feeling somewhat shallow compared to Burton's typical depth. Then there's the theme of family and tradition, which runs through the story but doesn't quite find that solid footing. Barnabas's desire to restore the Collins family legacy could have been a touching story of redemption, a vampire clinging to his humanity by honoring his family. Yet the tonal shifts frequently undercut the weight of these scenes with slapstick humor or outlandish moments that disrupt the emotional flow. It's as though Burton couldn't decide whether to commit to a gothic family drama or a campy horror comedy, resulting in a film that doesn't fully do justice to either. Symbolically, Burton often uses his settings and character design to convey themes of isolation and tradition. And while he tries to do that here, the execution feels fragmented. Collinswood Manor, for example, is rich with Gothic symbolism, representing the grandeur and decay of the Collins family. But rather than really getting into the history of this haunted place and what it means to Barnabas, the film keeps us on the surface, more interested in quirky gags than in building an atmosphere of mystery or melancholy. Ultimately, Dark Shadows has all the ingredients for a Burton-style exploration of identity, belonging, and legacy, but it feels like it's just skimming the surface. The film leans so heavily on humor that it doesn't give its darker, introspective moments a chance to breathe, which might be why it feels somewhat hollow compared to Burton's best works. Upon its release, Dark Shadows received a notably mixed reception from both critics and audiences alike. Critics weren't kind, often pointing out the film's inconsistent tone and a storyline that struggled to find its footing. Reviews ranged from praise for its visual flair and star-studded cast to criticism for its convoluted plot and uneven pacing. For instance, the New York Times highlighted the film's ambitious attempt to blend gothic horror with quirky comedy, but ultimately felt that the execution fell well short of Burton's brilliance. Similarly, Variety acknowledged Johnny Depp's charismatic performance, but lamented the film's inability to balance its various genre elements cohesively. Box office performance mirrored the tepid critical response. Dark Shadows debuted with high expectations, buoyed by the successful collaboration between Tim Burton and Johnny Depp in past films, most recently Alice in Wonderland. However, it underperformed financially, grossing approximately $209 million worldwide, but it had a budget of around $150 million. While it wasn't a complete flop, the margins were slim, especially considering the star power and the marketing push behind it. This performance was particularly underwhelming when compared to the other Burton-Depp ventures, which often garnered both critical acclaim and strong box office returns. In terms of the cultural impact, Dark Shadow didn't leave a lasting legacy that some of Burton's other films have achieved. Unlike Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands, which have blossomed into beloved classics with enduring fan bases, Dark Shadows has largely faded into obscurity. It's remembered primarily by Burton enthusiasts and die-hard Johnny Depp fans, rather than the broader movie-going public. The film didn't spawn a significant merchandise line, no extensive fan theories or annual celebrations that some of Burton's more iconic works enjoy. This lack of a sustained cultural footprint suggests that Dark Shadows didn't resonate as deeply or as widely as its predecessors. Examining where Dark Shadows sits within Burton's body of work is fascinating. Released in 2012, it came at a time when Burton's distinct style was not only well established, but also nearing a point of becoming almost a parody of itself. His films had become so synonymous with his unique blend of gothic aesthetics, eccentric characters, and dark humor that some critics and fans began to see his style as becoming formulaic. Dark Shadows exemplifies this sentiment. While the film boasts all the visual trademarks of a Burton film, the exaggerated architecture, the stark contrast in color palettes, and the whimsical and macabre set pieces, it sometimes feels like these elements are being employed more for their signature look rather than to serve the story organically. Some fans view Dark Shadows as a curious experiment, appreciating Burton's attempt to adapt a beloved, albeit unconventional soap opera into a cinematic experience. They enjoy the film's audacity to blend supernatural elements with 1970s kitsch and find charm in the campy moments. On the other hand, there are those who find it a frustrating example of style over substance. These critics argue that Burton's focus on maintaining his visual and thematic signature sometimes overshadows the narrative needs of the film, resulting in a story that's disjointed and less emotionally impactful. The film's attempt to straddle multiple genres, combining horror, comedy, romance, and family drama, adds to the perception of inconsistency. This genre blending, while ambitious, may have diluted the film's ability to fully commit to a single tone, leaving it neither here nor there. And this lack of clear, unified vision is a common critique, and one that likely contributed to the lukewarm reception the film received. In hindsight, Dark Shadows serves as an interesting case study in Burton's career. It highlights the challenges of balancing artistic signature with narrative coherence, and underscores the risks involved in adapting niche source material. While it may not stand tall alongside Burton's most celebrated works, it still offers moments of visual splendor and memorable performances that contribute to the rich tapestry of his filmography. So where does Dark Shadows ultimately fit within the Burton oeuvre? It sits as a bold but imperfect experiment, a film that ambitiously tries to merge Burton's beloved gothic style with a quirky supernatural narrative, but it sometimes falters in achieving the seamless blend that we have all come to expect. Whether you view it as a hidden gem or a misstep, Dark Shadows undeniably adds a unique chapter to the story of Tim Burton's illustrious career. Now, before we get into the wrap-up, let's dive into some of the fascinating behind-the-scenes stories that add trivia and extra layers to Dark Shadows. Starting with Johnny Depp, who we know played Barnabas Collins with his signature blend of that theatrical flair and quirky humor. Interestingly, Depp was a huge fan of the original Dark Shadows soap opera as a kid. The role of Barnabas wasn't just another character for him. It was sort of a dream come true. Depp has said he would rush home from school every day to catch the show, captivated by Barnabas's brooding, complex personality. This personal connection might explain Depp's dedication to bringing a unique spin to the character. Initially, Depp and Burton had even envisioned a darker, more faithful adaptation of Barnabas, honoring the eerie and gothic roots of the original series. However, as the project evolved, Burton chose to lean more into the campy, comedic elements, which some feel diluted the original dark vision Depp was so passionate about. And Depp wasn't the only cast member with a nostalgic attachment to the Dark Shadows universe. Michelle Pfeiffer, who plays the matriarch Elizabeth Collins, was also a fan of the original series and actively sought out the role. In fact, Pfeiffer reached out to Burton herself, eager to be involved in the project as soon as she heard about it. It's always great to see when actors are passionate about a project, as passionate as the fans generally are, especially when they've been longtime admirers. Pfeiffer's enthusiasm shines through in her performance, and knowing she was personally invested adds a deeper layer to her portrayal of Elizabeth, as someone deeply rooted in the mysterious Collins family legacy. Another interesting piece of trivia involves the film's distinct mix of set design and CGI. Collinswood Manor, the imposing Gothic mansion that serves as the family home, was partially created as a practical set. Burton wanted the actors to be able to feel immersed in this haunting, dilapidated environment. However, to enhance the supernatural feel of the mansion, Burton and his team added CGI flourishes, such as the twisted, sprawling vines and eerie details on the walls, creating an otherworldly effect that keeps us teetering between reality and fantasy. Though this blending of CGI with physical sets led to some mixed reactions, it reflects Burton's commitment to pushing the boundaries of visual storytelling, even if the final result didn't completely satisfy all fans. And a fun fact about one of Burton's longtime collaborators, Danny Elfman, he created the film's score with a slightly different approach than usual. While still rich and dark, haunting melodies, Elfman included a playful, almost mischievous element that matched the film's dark comedy tone. Elfman is known for his brooding gothic scores that seamlessly blend with Burton visuals, but here he intentionally lightened the mood, helping the soundtrack align with the film's quirky take on horror. Finally, the filming itself came with some challenges. Dark Shadows was shot in England, and the cast faced unseasonably chilly weather for many scenes, especially those set outdoors. Depp and some cast members joked about how the cold helped them channel that otherworldly discomfort, particularly for Depp as a centuries-old vampire out of his element in the modern world. There's even a story of Burton giving Depp occasional playful reminders to tap into his inner Barnabas every time the temperature dropped, almost as if the environment itself was keeping Depp's character in line. So these behind-the-scenes stories reveal the layers of personal connection, creative experimentation, and sheer dedication that went into Dark Shadows. Despite the mixed reviews, it's clear that the cast and crew poured a lot of heart and effort into bringing this quirky gothic world to life, even if the final product didn't quite capture the initial, darker vision Depp and Burton had in mind. So what's my personal take on Dark Shadows? I'll be honest, this one didn't quite land for me the way I hoped. Burton's signature gothic style is certainly present, but here it feels more like an embellishment than a driving force. Instead of that deep, immersive darkness he can weave into some of his films, it feels like we're just skimming the surface. The gothic elements come across more as set dressing than as something that truly shapes the atmosphere or storyline. One of the biggest challenges for me in Dark Shadows is the inconsistent tone. It shifts rapidly from horror to comedy to drama, which is jarring and ultimately leaves the story feeling disjointed. There are moments when you can see Burton's genius for dark humor and horror shine through, but they're often interrupted by sudden tonal shifts that never quite mesh. It's as if the film couldn't decide if it wanted to be an eerie gothic thriller or a campy satire, and in trying to be both, it misses the mark in each. The performances are another mixed bag. Johnny Depp does bring some memorable moments to the screen. His take on the character is quirky and theatrical, which provides some entertainment, but his portrayal can often feel a bit one note. Eva Green and Michelle Pfeiffer, on the other hand, infuse their characters with this great energy that often elevates the film when they're on screen. Their presence commands attention, and their scenes with Depp add spark that's lacking elsewhere. However, even their performances can't quite lift the film out of its structural and narrative shortcomings. So when it's all said and done, my score for Dark Shadows is a 3 out of 10. There's an intriguing visual appeal here, and you'll catch flashes of the magic Burton can bring to the screen, but it's buried beneath an uneven plot and a lack of focus. If you're a devoted Burton fan, it might be worth a watch to see how it fits within his body of work. Just go in with tempered expectations, and you might find some enjoyment in the visuals and performances. Now, thank you so much for joining me for this review of Dark Shadows. We'll pick up next week with the full-length version of Frankenweenie, a film where Burton returns to his roots in a way that might just remind us why we fell in love with his style to begin with. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Threads and Instagram at RealRealTalk, where we dive into each episode, we share behind-the-scenes content, and we attempt to engage with everyone. Let me know your thoughts on Dark Shadows. Does it resonate with you? Or do you feel it falls flat like I do? And then join us as always. Please drop a comment, a message at our email, therealrealtalk@gmail.com. We love to interact with our fans any way that we can. And we always want your tips, your tricks, and your criticisms, or what you would like us to review next time. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and keep watching, keep loving, and keep those reels rolling.